The strike against everything Pep Guardiola achieved at Barcelona has always been his inheritance. To this day, his more fundamentalist detractors ignore his rare capacity for detail and reinvention and see Leo Messi, Andres Iniesta, Xavi and the rest as the thermals which elevated and sustained Guardiola's reputation. It's the kind of perspective which depends on a very limited reading of what that era's Barcelona actually were. It's also one which assumes, wrongly, that all of those players were on a predetermined course for the stars and that Guardiola was just in the right place at the right time when the sky lit up around him. Incorrect. For an example of why, look no further than Carlo Ancelotti's sacking by Bayern Munich on Thursday morning. Managers don't act as multipliers upon their surroundings just by being there. Admittedly, Guardiola did have an advantage at Barcelona, although it's one often overlooked. La Masia, the club's famed academy, produced great players, but it also produced a certain type of footballer, technically advanced, intellectually and tactically pliable. It, at that particular time in history, equipped Guardiola with the parts required to build his masterpiece. Praise for the architecture belongs to him, of course, but a manager's philosophy is only as great as its realization at a different point in history, and equipped with tougher clay, the Catalan's methods would necessarily have propelled him into the stratosphere. At Manchester City, the circumstances are different. While a new, organic focus has emerged in recent years, with the Etihad complex its gleaming symbol, it remains primitive. No matter the level of infrastructural investment, it will be several decades at least until the facility can claim a reputation even vaguely comparable to Barcelona's. City also have no Johan Cruyff, no founding father. Prior to their purchase by the Abu Dhabi Group, the club's organizational energy was sapped by relegation fights, promotion pushes and a chronic shortage of cash, meaning time for ideological chin-stroking was limited. As a consequence, City have lacked a house style even during their more successful present. They have never been associated with a particular approach. They may have played certain types football under Roberto Mancini and Manuel Pellegrini, often with great results, but never with the effect of establishing a definitive sporting identity. They haven't passed the ball in a certain way. They don't specialize in scoring a particular type of goal. Neither do most contemporary teams, of course, but it remains a key difference between the Etihad and Camp Nou. To claim Guardiola as a success in his new job would be premature. Currently, his side are playing the most attractive and most potent football in the country and look lethal any time they take the field. But the memory of last season looms large, when their momentum shuddered to a halt at White Hart Lane and City took a shot to the chin from which they never recovered. The difference is in the detail. Guardiola had his players performing well last season, but never could it have been said they truly resembled anything from their coach past. Their construction phases were quite clumsy, with City's build-up work often lacking precision and execution, and even the superficially impressive 18 goals in the first 6 games was a slightly false statistic. They may have been relatively dominant over the first 6 weeks, but the football was never quite as advertised. Now it is. In all likelihood, nothing will ever truly compare to Guardiola's personal Camelot of 20,082,012, but his City side suddenly look infused with all the craft and movement promised. A lot of money has been spent in restocking the fullback positions, on Bernardo Silva and, last year, on Gabriel Jesus, but this current teams are inarguably a coaching rather than checkbook success. That's visible in the neatness of their incisions and the ease with which they're cutting through opponents. They're not just a group of heavy-set players being well paid to thud their way through walls, but a honed ballet troupe dancing with the shadows. They are dependent on choreography, not blunt force. It will depend on what happens next, of course, but should this season end in silverware and lead to a successful new era at Manchester City, then that would probably be the high watermark on Guardiola's CV. If he were to add the club's name to the list of European Cup winners, it certainly would. Why? Because consider the challenge upon his arrival. An imbalanced squad, the lack of that native style, and the absence of an academy supply line beyond raw ability and wealth. Guardiola has been denied some of the luxuries he was assumed to be dependent upon. The players he currently coaches haven't been reared on a particular, uniform approach to the game, nor have they been prepared from an early age to think in the same way that he does. There are few similarities, either, between the footballing educations of Raheem Sterling, Sergio Aguero, and Kevin De Bruyne. There are fewer still between those players and Guardiola himself. The points of reference are different across the board, meaning that the creation of harmony and chemistry, and the fostering of true tactical understanding is far more difficult. At Barcelona, that mastic did quite exist by default, but the conditions were more conducive to its creation, the learning curves were shallower, and there was a great deal of institutional trust. When players gathered around him at Ciutat Esportiva Joan Gamper and he explained his interpretation of the game, he was simply reinforcing principles that the majority of his squad already believed in. The movements off the ball, the speed with which possession should be released, and all of those third-man runs were already a part of the local syllabus. It would be reductive to claim that he didn't institute change at Barcelona. After his promotion, Guardiola brought a far greater emphasis on fitness to the first team and created new imperatives around timekeeping, which, as we know, is the kind of discipline capable of tweaking the ego of the modern professional. He also immediately disposed of Ronaldinho and Deco, two dressing room leaders whose attitudes had turned sour. For a rookie manager, he showed plenty of force. Nevertheless, his roots and his history lent him an immediate gravitas, and he was, for all intents and purposes, preaching to the choir. He delivered those sermons with some weighty backing, too. Cruyff himself was a vocal supporter, even after the club's poor start in 200809. In England it's been different. His decision to work in this country brought him nose-to-nose with a football culture which thinks itself to be special and resents anyone who challenges that belief. It may sound conspiratorial, but there were plenty who would have enjoyed Guardiola's failure and revelled in the statement that would have made about the Premier League. Of more practical difficulty has been the need to restring the entire City instrument. They are a talented but disparate group with no shared upbringing. For them to play as they currently do, with movement and understanding which looks to have been bred over a decade, is highly descriptive and is so in a way which, really, transcends the importance of the recent transfer spend. Aguero and Jesus, for instance, were assumed not be able to play together. They are, with great production. Raheem Sterling was thought of as a limited player, over-reliant on pace and over-promoted by virtue of his nationality. Under Guardiola, the subtle intelligence of his movement and regularity of his goals has quietened that discussion almost entirely. It's the beginning of the process rather than the end of it, clearly, but this early form is highly instructive. This is his team now, playing with that familiar precision and those bright swirls of movement. We remain more than 7 months away from any club being crowned champions, and if Manchester City fall away between now and then, the relevance of their incendiary start will shrink to zero. If they don't, however, and Guardiola's players continue to bloody opponents with their ethereal movement and quick, stinging jabs, it would represent a further purge of the asterisks which surround him and an achievement which would be even harder to argue with. Share this. 31801 Barcelona, Manchester City, Pep Guardiola, Premier League. Kelechi Iheanacho's start at Leicester stymied by his sense of timing.